All right, so tonight we've got this badass interview between Candice Owens and Judge Joe Brown. Judge Joe Brown be dropping the bombs of information. He's got all the answers. I swear, this guy, he's been around. I didn't realize he was involved in the Martin Luther King assassination as a judge and or John F. Kennedy. But check this shit out.
All rise. Court is now in session. Man, I have been waiting to say that. The plaintiff is Candice Owens. The defendant is Kamala Harris. The case before the judge is that she says she's black, and I say she is not. And so it is an honor for me to host Judge Joe Brown, who has been making the rounds because he vaguely remembers a conversation, not vaguely, he very much remembers a conversation that he had with her daddy. And the things that Kamala is saying today don't really match what Kamala's father, Donald Harris, told Judge Joe Brown. Welcome to Candice.
Well, the judge is in the house, dear. So here I am. Anyway, I came right down the road from Memphis, not too far.
So you have been all over the news. Actually, right now, you probably are not on Twitter, but there's a clip of you that's gone absolutely viral.
Well, I am on Twitter, X.
Oh, yeah, you're on X. Okay, good.
Yeah, you can get me at Judge Joe Brown TV.
Okay, so did you know that you were going viral this morning?
No, I didn't, but it wouldn't be the first time. And then they tried to knock that down. Kwame Brown and I did a thing 2 or 3 years back, and we got up to 9.8 million views, which is definitely viral. But then we started knowing that the views started dropping, and then if you look at it now, it's like 800,000. I guess they didn't want anybody to look at 9.8 million. You want to see what's going on. Well, that's not anything compared to what Trump and Musk get on X.
Yeah, well, the numbers that you're pulling right now, I would say, are equivalent to Trump and Musk, particularly a clip of you that's on stage. So I'm going to tell you what I saw, and I've actually played clips of you on my show as well. The thing that I love about judges is you tend to have a really good memory and a great record with the truth. And I can say, after speaking with you leading up to this, you don't forget a thing. You do not.
Sometimes you want to forget some things. You say, oh, no, did I do that back when? But then sometimes you don't.
Yeah, and you clearly remember a lot, and you were running the exact same circles as Kamala Harris. You're out in California. So can you explain to us how you met her father, just how that came about?
What was going on is this is a convoluted story. Magic Johnson's mother, a fine woman, and one of her buddies, who was the oldest sister of a personal friend of mine, would always involve me in these projects with the islands, right? So they got me down there, and I was supposed to participate in the youth program in Jamaica. So I was the guest of the Prime Minister and the Governor General.
And who was that at the time?
Well, let's not get into that because there's some complications with that. And my ex and I, we were attendees at this dinner, so we got introduced to everybody's favorite Hindu professor. And he was sitting next to my ex-wife, or wife at the time, for a while, so we all had this back and forth questioning thing at the table. So it was quite interesting, and I recalled running into him back in the 60s. He and his wife were grad students up in the Bay Area, and I was an undergrad at UCLA, so there was a back and forth between Los Angeles, man, where you go crazy and then go to the asylum up in the Bay Area. So it was interesting what was going on back then.
So how was his demeanor when you guys are at this dinner and you're in Jamaica? What do you think about him?
He's reserved.
Reserved. Okay.
Dignified, laid back.
Mm-hmm. But still involved and my understanding is that he's been involved in politics actually for a long time, has had an interest in politics his entire life, I would say.
Yes, quite. I'd call him a Marxist.
A Marxist. And that is exactly what I've heard from a family member of his, that he, from the time he was very young, was always involved in Marxist meetings and Marxist groups, kind of a dyed-in-the-wool commie. I don't think that's something that he's ashamed of, by the way. I think he wrote about in the Jamaican Global Online how he was sort of raised up on the politics via who he purports to be his grandmother, Christiana Brown. But it's interesting that you said you were introduced to a Hindu professor.
Mm-hmm.
What made you think that he was Hindu?
That's the introduction.
That was the introduction. Okay. And your wife?
What is she?
No, did she get to talk to him about that?
She talked to him, and it was interesting because at that time there was no reason to put him with anybody special until you started putting all of it together. He was a Marxist, and when he was up in the Bay Area, a lot of things were going on up there. That was Liberty Park up there, where in 1964, a lot of what was going on that led to the rousing unrest of the 60s and the public demonstrations was happening. My in-laws were from up there, and I didn't know them then because I think my ex-wife was born the same year that Kamala was born. So, this was before all of that. But this was the locus of a lot of things going on. The Black Panther Party was up there, developed. So it was pretty radical in Berkeley, Oakland, Richmond. And this is where the action was. UCLA was in Los Angeles, that was a bit more civilized, really wild up there in the Bay Area. So he gravitated to that. That's the way I would analyze it. So there was a Marxist thing up there. Also, this was during the rise of Jim Jones, which is another thing. Jim Jones, the Kool-Aid and the picnic. Kamala's sponsor, Willie Brown, Maxine Waters, and some other people Nancy Pelosi were staunch supporters of Jim Jones. Interesting, yes. You need to look into that. You'll find some very interesting things like, hey, this was your mentor, and he was a supporter of this. So it was a center for a lot of radicalism at the time.
So it's so funny how life happens. This year, and I don't even know what the reason was. Actually, a friend of mine sent me a book, and the book was called Chaos. And she said, "You'll love this for your birthday." I read, and I opened the book and I couldn't put it down. It was the subtitle of the book is something along the lines of Charles Manson, MK Ultra in the 1960s. Okay, and essentially it's this reporter who was just supposed to write a magazine article on like the 30th anniversary of the Manson murders, and he had no horse in the race. Starts calling around, making some calls. He was very well known, and everyone was scared to talk to him. Long story short, he ends up finding that the CIA was intimately involved, and now this is public knowledge. You can look this up on Wikipedia, that Charles Manson was a Fed, that the CIA was involved, was there the night of the Manson murders. It takes him 30 years. He ended up getting fired from the magazine. He ends up writing this book. He went completely broke because he had to do so many FOIA requests because he was going, what is happening? What really actually happened on this night? And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because elements of this book, as he goes through understanding that the feds were involved with a lot of this radicalism that people thought was organic, whether we're talking about the hippies movement, LSD, things that were happening that to the public seemed to be sort of these natural movements, actually entailed operations from the Fed, COINTELPRO, MK Ultra. You're talking about the Black Panthers. Some students broke into the FBI office at that time and were able to get documents which showed that the feds were tracking a bunch of people. Obviously, we know that with Martin Luther King. And this journalist who was from San Francisco and attended Berkeley, recently wrote a piece saying that he knew that Kamala's mother was involved with the feds and the program MK Ultra. And when I read this, it seemed so far out And then as I was learning from Donald's family that he was a dyed-in-the-wool communist, and I'm learning that he was extremely secretive, and I'm kind of thinking, why was Kamala's mom, who was like a top-rated scientist?
Maybe that's why they didn't seem to be able to stand each other after a while. There seems to have been some great animosity between mom and dad. When they broke up, you might be hitting on the source of the problems.
Mm-hmm.
That was very widespread. People don't understand what that was like back in the 60s to be active. We would have meetings or gatherings, and 3 weeks later, the FBI is hauling you in and quoting to you what you said, and you'd say, yeah, freedom of speech, First Amendment, you got that? No, I'm not going to tell you this because you'll get me for making a knowingly false statement. Screw you. I'll take the fifth on that, or get me back. And they'd always manage to get you so they could take your phone book and get the numbers out of it. So you took to no longer carrying your black book with you, because no telling when the FBI is going to pick you up. And by the way, I was the last judge on that James Earl Ray case, and I know what the FBI did. Wow. That quick summation to set the background. Ray had absolutely nothing to do with King dying. The FBI ordered that hit. They recruited a two-man sniper team, not one, from Quantico Marine Sniper School, which was right across the tarmac from the FBI school. They supplied the weapon, which is an XM21, which is a modified M14. I do have, in various places around the country, the serial numbers for the 5 of them they got on an invoice late December 1967, and 5,000 rounds of the ammunition that are identical in aspects to what they pulled out of King's body. The next thing is the Justice Department ordered them to return the 5 rifles. April 68, that's the month King was assassinated, and they claim they lost one. That's the murder weapon. And they have the serial numbers for the 4 they did return, so they only made 63 of them at the time. So the FBI is suspect. This COINTELPRO developed later, but they had the SIS unit. And if anybody wants to read about that, get the Glass House tapes written by Louis Tackwood. Tackwood scared the hell out of me and a lot of other people. We knew him as supposedly somebody who had been a medic in the NOM, and he came back and he was treating people who got injured in the 60s. It was chaotic in those days. And I remember I was in law school and I went to watch this murder trial downtown L.A. and they brought it in. I said, that's Tackwood. Not only was he not a snitch, they introduced him as Lieutenant Louis Tackwood, Vice Commander of the SIS unit for LAPD. I was going, oh man, this dude knows everything, but he didn't tell on everybody. But this was real. And I know 15, 16 people that I was acquainted with that got shot to death who were active in these movement situations.
This has been a strange election. The Dems have made it apparent that they are zealous for the blood of babies. Kamala Harris is the first vice presidential candidate to ever visit an abortion facility. As First Things reported, Tim Walz supports the right to infanticide. Did you hear me? Infanticide is the taking of a baby's life after birth. It is, like I said, insane. The media has dubbed this the abortion election. We must take a stand against this evil. When you join forces with Preborn, the largest pro-life organization in the nation, you are protecting the greatest victims in our society, babies in their mother's womb. Preborn's network of clinics are positioned in the highest abortion areas in the nation, and they have rescued over 300,000 babies. When a woman considering abortion searches to end her baby's life, Preborn is there. Preborn gives these women in need a free ultrasound. The power of hearing the baby's heartbeat on an ultrasound combined with God's love doubles a baby's chance at life. One ultrasound costs just $28, and up to 5 ultrasounds are $140, and they can save lives. Any gift will help their cause, and all gifts are tax deductible. To donate securely, you just dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby. or you can go to preborn.com/Candice. Again, that's preborn.com/Candice. Why did the FBI, so obviously, by the way, you said something very big in terms of a lot of people who are young and are not well read up on history, real history. What they learn in the classroom is essentially a fairy tale. I've known that the
Oh, yes.
FBI killed MLK. Most people understand the FBI killed MLK. But why? They were tapping him, they were threatening him, they were, everything was crazy. And we could talk about JFK too, but what was their reason for being so obsessed with the Black Panthers, with they murdered many of the Panthers as well. They murdered Martin Luther King Jr. And it's also very scary that they can do these things and then print out textbooks that say, oh no, this random guy did it, so what was their reason? What was their obsession with wanting to infiltrate these movements?
They were concerned about what was going on in the Nam. There's a big hookup with everybody that we've been talking about, also Obama's people, Barry Soetoro's people, and the Nam. The idea, for instance, the memoranda we got a hold of with the King assassination thing, they were not worried about him starting civil rights back up. That was dead. Civil rights was dead and gone by the mid-1960s. It had been replaced by militancy, and the FBI memoranda, actually they were discussing whether he'd be more dangerous as a dead martyr or is alive somebody to galvanize the anti-war movement and revitalize labor. Those were the two things they were concerned about. I recruited John Huggins, Bunchy Carter, Geronimo Pratt, Elaine Brown, Nat Clark, and a few other people who were in the Panthers to UCLA back in the 60s. And it was the same thing with them. What were they going to do about getting people wrapped up in this militancy of saying we're not going to be down on our knees while somebody beats us across the head anymore and somebody else feels guilty? We're going to do something about it. And I've seen the stories that came out of the assassination of John and Bunchy at UCLA. Hell, I was there. They ran right past me when not John, but his assassins are running right past me. They'd shot John in the back twice, and he died of that, but not before he set up and fired 6 shots at him, the guy that shot him, and 3 others running down the hallway. Elaine Brown and I were getting ready to go up some stairs when this went on. So it's interesting, the LAPD detectives that were investigating the homicides, they wound up calling some of us and say, could you meet us at, of all places, Denny's? Well, why not at the police precinct? Because it's not safe. Somebody on our side is not working on our side. They're working with something else. And we have cause to be fearful of our lives, meaning they, the detectives. So we would have these meetings in some weird places, and we'd discuss stuff, and they'd say, we're trying to make a bust, but only people that know are in our department. And when we get there, somebody's already told, and
yeah, so
they've gone.
That was a huge piece of that chaos book, was that it made me understand that the feds have people at the LAPD office that do the cleanups, that are watching everybody to see what they're investigating, and also at the medical examiner's office, the coroner's office, like making sure that the reports say what they want them to say, so that they can present their case. I mean, he showed from top to bottom, like judges, lawyers, the LAPD. I would never live in LA after reading this book, because you realize it's just an entire operation. They can make you disappear, they'll kill you, and you'll be none the better. And that almost directly ties in with what we're learning about the Diddy case, which is like, okay, that he knew who to call at the LAPD to come over and to make something disappear if things got out of hand, or if somebody was shot or somebody got hurt. And so this has been going on, and I think this discussion is really important since the 60s. I've been really working hard for people to wake up about who your government is. But I'm fascinated that you say that you think it was about the war, because that really was my takeaway from that book, Chaos, was they needed the hippie generation to end and having this big fake staged Hollywood murder that the CIA was actually involved in and Charles Manson was a Fed, was a way to traumatize with propaganda, was to traumatize the public, the hippie communes, everyone's love, rock and roll, let's not go to war. And he basically said overnight, because of these horrific murders, people started locking their doors. They were afraid of hippies, and the music died that day. Nobody wanted anything with like peace, love, rock and roll, and LSD because they were just all told and following this case. So we're talking about a psychological operation that was enacted on the public to create a mass psychosis. And you're virtually saying the exact same thing. What was their worry? Well, people didn't want to go to war, and they had war on the mind, and they wanted to get to war, and they couldn't have anybody who was militantly against it or peacefully against it like the hippies were.
There's another cook up too. We were talking about that rainbow thing. It's interesting how they got started. In the late mid-'60s, they're going around all over the country talking about this, and it was a coalition of those who hated that they weren't men. Those were the feminists. The ones that hated men, some of the lesbians. The ones that hated that they weren't normal men, that were some of the gays. The ones that hated that they weren't strong men, the soy boys, so to speak. And then the big chunk was this other, hey man, war is a man thing, man. You know, it's all about love, man. We got to have love power, man, flower power. Men are about war. You have to change the way men are raised from boys so they're more into expressing themselves. So you got this thing there that had the overwhelming ballast. And that is the impetus for what led us to where we are now. And this was an important thing. It was an anti-man thing that developed because of this perception that men are responsible for war. Forget about the fact that we've got a large component of the military now and some striving to be in combat arms that are female. But it was perceived to be a man thing, so no war toys, no cap guns, no water pistols. Boys and girls had unisex child clothing, child rearing. Boys are supposed to be able to emote, to cry, to shout, to let it all hang out instead of being so uptight and under self-control. And the worst thing you want is the apex predator on the planet Earth to be out of control, which is exactly what they were setting up. And this thing came together, and it juxtaposed itself in a situation where Hollywood's movie studios were going bankrupt in the face of color television. A color TV up until the mid-'60s, the screen looked just like this table. It was round and no bigger than that. And then they got square when the technology improved, so people were staying at home watching their color TVs. 1967, if you were an adult, you'd pay 50 cents to get in a movie, and you got two movies, and they changed every Thursday and Sunday, no matter how well they did. You got 3 cartoons and a couple of sub-features. Walk in anytime you wanted, stay as long as you wanted. So then somebody came up with the bright idea, let's just have one movie at a time, keep it playing as long as people will come. Let's go get the black markets. The minority markets, they want to see themselves. That's a massive amount of money out there. Let's start using the opportunity to spread dysfunction through glorification of it. We don't want Sidney Poitier playing a part where he's trying to be this and that. Let's get Fred the Hammer Williams to play a drug dealer like Black Caesar, so you glorify being a pimp, a hoe, and we'll come back to that in a bit. A gangster, a drug dealer, a murderer, a thief, and you got Foxy Brown with Pam Grier, and there was this whole thing where they'd have the obligatory naked, nude scenes in the whole thing. And the plot would be somebody got killed by somebody's drug dealers, and then so they wanted the revenge, and then they wanted to become drug dealers, and then you got Superfly and all of that nonsense, and you got glorification of dysfunction. And the theory that I heard was that young black men are supposed to be the epitome of masculinity, so let's effeminize them, and then you can effeminize the whole public, because the young white guys will try to copy the young black guys, and if you effeminize the young black guys, you get everybody in this mess. And then that led to what they did with the rap genre, which has been stagnant for 45 years. I mean, it's gotten more profane, but it hasn't changed.
But also, it's exceedingly homosexual. I mean, everyone's gay.
Yes, it is. And the other thing is, it's not very masculine, because some of the malinformed feminists say it's this sexual fantasy. That's not what you're looking at when you're looking at the half-naked bimbos bouncing on stage behind the rap artist in the gangster hip-hop rap video. That's not his girlfriend. That's his mama, grandmama, and their friend girls and their favorite aunts. So they ideate on feminist stuff like who's going to take care of me, and I got women I live off of. I'm not a producer, I'm not a protector, and you got this whole downhill spiral, which is leading us to where we are right now, where there's no duty, honor, accountability, responsibility, bravery, courage. There's no guilt, no shame to keep you self-corrected and self-focused. You're not interested in making where you live a better, safer, more secure place filled with economic prosperity, sense of purpose, morality, and ethics, and you're not dedicating yourself to being a man or a woman of public peace, dignity, and order. You just let it all go to hell. And you try to destroy all human character building things, because anything counts. Because if you have character, and let's say you're a man, that means if you happen to be on the Titanic and it goes down, you say, ma'am, you and your child may have my seat on a lifeboat. I'll drown in the freezing waters. What happens is you say, I've got on a dress too, so get out of the way. That's my seat. You know?
Yeah.
No, take him and throw him over there and chum the sharks with him, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely see that they've kind of just continued, or they moved it on. I mean, it's a Fed operation, and then they realized the power of media, the power of Hollywood, the power of propaganda through the TV screen. And it's interesting to see that despite overwhelming evidence that that's what's happening in terms of the music, and I know I'm on the right track. As soon as you say, like, gangster rap is a Fed operation, as soon as you start talking about the Fed's involvement in Hollywood, the media goes crazy. The media has always been an extension of the Feds. They literally paid them Operation Mockingbird after they shot JFK. They had them on payroll to, control the masses and what they think. And yet you have people who are still so controlled. And I can't think of a better example of that than looking at the fawning over Barack Obama and the fawning over Kamala Harris, and their belief that magically, if a journalist writes that they're black, and she creates this trove of fake photos of aunts and uncles and a photoshopped photo of her and her grandma Beryl, that's not her grandma.
She came back from the grave.
Yeah, exactly. Then suddenly people just believe it. They just go, oh, well, if the media is telling me that this obviously Hindu woman is black, then I better just accept that she's going to be the first black president. And it's just incredible that people can't stop and process that the media is not telling you the truth.
That's 50 years of glorification of dysfunction. Don't think, just accept. And it's a propaganda thing that they've been laying out there for a long time. And back in the 60s, if you were at the right college campus, you could hear them planning it. Like join both political parties to create chaos, so that's a smoke screen you can operate behind. Okay, propagandize the public. Take the black experience. You want to be fair to the black folk in the country, so you extend that fairness to other things, and you can use it as a cover. We can get into that later if you want to, but it's a farce, and it's a bill of goods that's being sold on the public. Now, when you get into this whole thing and you get back to the FBI, you have to understand that the FBI is not a holy organization.
It's a gang.
How it came into existence. They wanted to get Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson was the first black world heavyweight champion. Nobody could beat him. And back then, they'd have bouts 25, 30, 40 rounds worth till nobody was standing and nobody could beat him. And Jack Johnson had a white wife. So people objected to him traveling around with his white wife and her entourage, and they just thought this was just horrible. So they created the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to go get something that became the Mann Act, which you can see them using on Diddy, and they used it on R. Kelly. I'm not defending either one of them or persecuting them either or prosecuting, but that's what they were using. So what happens is Jack Johnson and his wife were going across
State line.
Georgia to go to a seaport to go to France, and they had gotten 15 minutes in when the FBI, who were not armed in those days, were accompanied by U.S. Marshals. They rushed the train and they arrested him. They prosecuted him, convicted him. He escaped. He went to France. His mother wanted to see him, and he tried to sneak back in. He got caught, served his time, actually more for the escape than for the offense, wound up dying in a car wreck in 1946. Obama wouldn't pardon him, but Trump did posthumously. And for a lot of older black folk, Jack Johnson was Muhammad Ali, Joe Louis, in prototype. But that's how Hoover got started. He was assigned to the brothels in New York, and he was masquerading as one of those little special taste functions on the third floor. He was a cute little colored boy at the time. And by the way, Smithsonian Institution and the History Channel, they have gotten into him being black and passing. And J. Edgar Hoover. If you look, I'll show you some pictures.
I've never heard this.
Oh, I'll show you some pictures, and if you look at it, you're looking at somebody that looks more black than Kamala does. So anyway, that's how the FBI came into existence, and they had made a career or a history, and with this guy in charge for 50-some years, of being very political and keeping things under control. That was his game. World War I, he started doing this anti-German thing. Then it became anti-communist. And after World War I, when they had prohibition, they got assigned the task of keeping track of legitimately produced alcohol, which was why FBI agents were supposed to be either certified public accountants or attorneys specializing in tax. Yeah, really right in there, macho, gun-slinging law enforcement. No, that's why they had special agents like Melvin Purvis and Elliot Ness, and they were stone-cold killers, and they'd each been responsible for taking 15, 20, 30 lives, and they were made special agents. Interestingly enough, all of them seemed to have committed suicide within a 6-month period in 1949. I guess they found out what Hoover was, but that's another thing. So
Hoover was very into some weird sexual stuff.
Yeah.
Which is another thing,
Colson.
but also a part of this thing, because more and more we're realizing that sexual perverts are put into positions of power. And
they have a
alarming.
certain viciousness about what they do. Certain lack of connection with tomorrow. So, boom, they are ruthless. Not all of them, but a lot of them are very ruthless. They don't have much concern for other people, and they lack altruism, the willingness to sacrifice for others. So
he was definitely a homosexual and a cross-dresser.
Yes.
So we're against, and I'm only saying this because this is becoming a bit of a theme. I've been looking into the Emmanuel Macron situation. wife situation as well. Barack Obama had a
Bathhouse Berry.
Yeah, he had a trans nanny growing up, but his mother was okay with. I didn't even know that this was like mainstream news years ago. I just learned it. And so we're starting to see like it isn't possible in my mathematical opinion that the odds are that all of these people that go on to become presidents or to these tremendous positions of power have these weird sexual perversion backgrounds, sort of upbringings. We're starting to see a little bit of a theme here, which kind of makes, I think, a person that has the capability to think on their own wonder, is this a global operation to just kind of seed people into positions of power, and the world is just a stage?
It's a family thing,
It's a
too.
family thing.
Have you ever heard of Samuel Hinckley?
Is he related to John Hinckley? No.
Hinckleey. Look him up.
Is he related to the
Late
Hinckley
of
that
Cape Cod.
shot?
No,
Okay.
no. Remotely. But he had 7 of his descendants who were U.S. presidents, one who was a U.S. vice president, one who was governor of Alaska, several billionaires. And what you find is, if you look up Samuel Hinckley, they will note some of his more interesting modern relatives or descendants. So here's the way it breaks down. Lolo Soetoro.
This is Barack Obama, just so everyone's watching, that's Barack Obama's stepfather, who he was raised with for the first 8 years of his life.
Okay, well, the rest of his life afterwards, Barry Soetoro has an interesting situation. His mother, on his maternal side, his grandfather was first cousin to President George Herbert Walker Bush. So George Herbert Walker Bush, George Walker Bush, Dick Cheney, vice president, they're all cousins. Sarah Palin is a cousin. Barack Obama is a cousin. George Herbert Walker, who founds Halliburton, is Uncle Herbie to all of them. And interestingly, when he was running against John McCain's running partner was his cousin, Sarah Palin, who was governor of Alaska. Real unholy alliance, right? So other thing is the Bushes for the last 150 years have been supplying international intelligence, and they were into what they call paper entrepreneurialism. They would acquire businesses and sell the components off. Uncle Herbie founded Halliburton, had something to do with Enron as well, which was energy development. Lolo Soetoro was international executive vice president for Standard Oil, and he was in the oil business, but he also ran the death squads for the Indonesian army.
Oh, it's funny because when you look him up, it just says that, like, what do they say that no, he was an engineer? Whatever they say, it's like he did. They make it seem like he did. Oh, he was a geographer. That's what it says. It says that he was a geographer who did some work for the government.
I had a brother who was into that, and then the oil petroleum production was part of it. Anyway, you get Lolo Soetoro running the death squads for the Indonesian government, so that meant you had money. Indonesia might have had access to the world's largest oil reserves as they were perceived at the time. So Standard Oil used his muscle and his position to take over the oil industry in Indonesia, which they couldn't do under American law. So George Herbert Walker Bush, under the auspices of Uncle Herbie, George Herbert Walker, sets up Zapata Oil. They have a family holding company, Zapata Offshore Oil, which was chartered in Kuwait, by the way. Keep that in mind. And what winds up happening is George Herbert Walker, dealt with Lolo Soetoro quite frequently on oil deals. And remember, George Herbert Walker becomes chief of the CIA under the Ford administration, and he deals with their number one contract guy over in Asia, which when the NAM was going on, Lolo ran intelligence for the CIA under contract in China, North Korea, North Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Indonesia. So Barack's grandmother hustles her daughter, who was 17 at the time, into a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship with Barack Obama Sr., who was being recruited from Kenya to offset Jomo Kenyatta in the Mau Mau. That was a CIA project. Grandmommy was vice president of a Hawaiian bank, and she distributed the funds for the CIA in the South and Northwest Pacific at the time.
That explains
so
what they were doing out in Hawaii.
She puts him together with her daughter, who was 17 years old. Barack is born, and then they quickly go their separate ways, and then grandmommy gets daughter and hooks her up with Lolo Sotoro. And remember, grandmommy is married to President Bush's first cousin. So
That's incredible.
that's where you get this, and then you get...
So Barack Obama's grandmother, the one who raised him in Hawaii, is married to, so his grandfather is married to...
in other words, the grandfather is Bush's cousin.
First cousin.
Yeah, and they're all nephews to Uncle Herbie, who founded Halliburton in 1946 in Oklahoma. It had previously been chartered under that name in 1919 in Oklahoma, but it went defunct, so he revived it.
So it's actually quite interesting that you're saying that, because when I began this investigation into Kamala, before I had even presented it to the public, I was just seeing what was already out there. And there was this random person who wrote a blog piece years ago, 10 years ago, saying that, you know, and I thought it was crazy when I read it, but he said that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden share a grandfather. And I went, like, that's so wacky. And so, what are you talking about? But then as we started realizing...
That's on the Irish side.
Right. The same last name, Finnegan. They actually are all Finnegans, and they both kind of have, once you get to granddad stage, it gets a little shady, is what I'll say. You know, she's lying about things. Her dad's lying about things. I can't quite figure out, like, we can't find a picture of the real Beryl. We know that Beryl had a sister who was very, very white, and actually the name that she gives us, Patrick Alnahanus Finnegan, doesn't seem to exist. So we're lying about a grandparent somewhere. And then when I start looking into Biden's side, I was doing it this weekend, you know, things are pretty shady there too. I'm just kind of at the beginning of this, but, you know, it's like his great grandfather, like, you know, same situation, like the parents both died at very young ages. One was an alcoholic. You know, it's always like the parents somehow go missing, and then the grandparents, like he also, like, you know, was really raised and formed by his grandparents. So it's getting interesting, especially when you consider what the world was, which I think is something that people don't do. Like people always want to apply the logic to today, and they don't realize how things were back in the 60s or back in the 40s, how easy it was to fake documents, how easy it was to move into different countries.
Yes.
And I had Kamala's family relative tell me that you could literally just walk into the office in Jamaica and say, like, make a birth certificate. Like, it was just very easy to get things done in that way.
Very. And see, the other thing, too, is you, with your situation, you are well aware of the Commonwealth, right? Okay. Your in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, that was Hong Kong, Singapore, that was Nigeria, that was Kenya, South Africa, that was Pakistan, that was India, that
Jamaica.
was Jamaica, man. That was the Bahamas, that was Barbados, that was New Zealand, that was Australia. So I used to get to Jamaica an awful lot. So you hear somebody, "Hey man, everything gonna be all right, man. I man." Speaking patois, and you turn around and there's somebody Chinese talking like they go, "Oh wow." Well, see, it's the British Commonwealth, before that the British Empire, so everybody travels freely around there. Now I have a friend that's married to a Jamaican. She was born in Jamaica, so were her parents, but she's English aristocracy, and I won't mention the name, but they're related to the English royals. She's blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and she was born in Jamaica because her aristocratic parents just happened to be over there, and they were born when their aristocratic English nobility parents were born in the place. So it's an interesting thing when you see that, and it's St. Elizabeth Parish where all of the high, bright, and white Jamaicans are, and it's an interesting little hookup. So we get an international thing, but there is a family situation that gets in here. And Kamala's folk were trying to get in on it through the mother because they were Hindu. Now, the dad said his background is Irish and also from India, the Hindu thing, and he became a Marxist because that was what was going on back when he was coming of age in the early 1960s. Now, when you get this in place, you run into the fact that there are family situations. Now, when I was in Hollywood, I made a whole lot of money. I had places all over the country, and I had 2 places in Aspen, Colorado. So my ex was a social climber, and she was a ski instructor up in Aspen, of all things. So everybody wanted to go skiing with Mrs. Brown in the backcountry. So we wound up meeting billionaires and really multi-millionaires. And it's interesting because there are these family connections that are not obvious, except when you walk around Aspen. It's awful. Everybody starts at 6'1" for the females and gets up to these guys that all look like Adonis that are these great athletes. You know, it's like, damn, man, they've been breeding, smart and, good looking and athletic. And they all have these interesting relationships with each other that aren't obvious and that they don't make public. You had, starting with the Adams family, you had President Adams and his son, President Adams. You had the Roosevelts, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You had the Kennedys and then they had muscle because Joe Kennedy Sr. was a gangster. He was a bootlegger, and he used
That's how they established Hollywood, by the way. It was a bunch of gang members that established Hollywood. The bootleggers went in there, carnies.
Yeah, I'll tell you some stuff off the record about that. Yeah. So it's like you get this whole thing, and then you get the Bushes in here, and then you have the Clintons who are newbies into this whole thing. And now you have some other stuff that's going on, these peripherals.
Well, it's funny you say that the Clintons are newbies, though, because even like Bill Clinton has like a weird story. Like his dad was killed in a car accident when he was like 2. It's like once you start looking into their genealogy, they all kind of have like these weird tragic stories, and then they're just kind of become the president. And I'm like, okay, well, I've lived around a lot of people who have like don't have a dad. Like they don't really go on to like go to Harvard and Yale and become president. So it's like it just makes you wonder, like, what is actually happening here?
And then you find something else. Look at Barack Obama. What kind of connection does Barack Obama or Barry Soetoro have with the United States? He's got a long history through his mother's side of the family. They were slave owners, and 2 of his ancestors were Confederate officers during the Civil War. One even rode with Cantrell, the guerrilla up in Kansas and Missouri. He's got a connection. But even if you get away from whether or not Kamala is black, what connection does she have with the United States? Probably the least out of any candidate for president in this country's history. So you have a situation where her parents have academic visas. They're transitory. They have no intention of being permanent residents or citizens. It's passing through. And she lies a lot about it, but you've seen that, when she got to Canada, how old she was, and that's her background.
Graduated from high school, wealthy Canadian.
The whole 9 yards. And she doesn't have that American vibe where you from elementary school are taught about what this country's supposed to be about. You have this thing where it's part of the Commonwealth, so they're subjects. Now, you probably have talked to your husband about that and your father-in-law, the Earl. And, you know, they view this whole thing about being subjects in a different way than we here in the States view about being a citizen.
It's very different. Across the pond is very different.
Very different. But that's the background with Kamala, the way she was brought up. And you get the feeling that somebody is trying to become part of something, but they don't want anybody with any real connection. The more isolated they are, the more they're subject to convenient control. You know, today is tomorrow, which is why yesterday is tomorrow too, which is why we all, you know, that word salad nonsense, which is you got a silly somebody that's lazy, that's not the brightest bulb on the shelf, and is easily manipulated because somebody has done what in Hollywood they call the casting couch routine to get where they are. But at some point, if you get to the top with the casting couch, the problem is that there's nobody to sleep with after a certain point. You have to have the raw talent, and if you don't have the talent, then you're not going to do anything much. And that's what our problem is. It's who is behind her and who is controlling her.
Interrupting to tell you guys some exciting news. With the election coming up next month, Sticker Mule is offering a free Trump sticker pack when you sign up. So visit stickerpack.com. Whether you want to show your support or just spark some fun conversations, Sticker Mule's got you covered. That's stickerpack, PAC.com to get your free Trump sticker pack today. Hurry, because it's only for a limited time. Yeah, that's what concerns me, is that she comes across to me like an empty vessel, and it was interesting to read. You know, I'm not saying, obviously, that everything this journalist wrote was real, but I do take his points about her mother being a government agent quite seriously, because of just, he says, even in her demeanor, because then when I spoke to Kamala's family members, they said, far from this depiction that she has of this, you know, warm, fluffy upbringing, that actually her mother was quite militant with her. And if we're thinking that she was involved with the government and MK Ultra, you're talking about psychological conditioning, that Kamala has been psychologically conditioned since her youth. And what's really stunning, and this is kind of what became a big question in my mind, is as she creates this book of this work of fiction as a way to blackify herself, to make Black people think that she, you know, spent so much time in Harlem and she was around Black aunties and Black uncles. And the thing that is stunning to me is it wasn't necessary, right? You can run as a white person, you can run as an Indian. Vivek just ran as an Indian. Hillary Clinton almost won, you know, as running as a woman, lost twice. But the point is that, like, you're allowed to be white and run. We don't have an issue with a white person becoming president of the United States. Joe Biden was just the president of the United States. So what specifically was the reason, and this is where I had to get to, that they worked so hard to blackify her, to completely ignore her plenty of white relatives? And that's what makes me think it's got to be a pretty big secret. You know what I mean? They're trying to basically obscure her true lineage in a way that if you're thinking she's Black, your brain's not even processing that she might be related to like a Hillary or somebody else. So that really stands out to me, is how unnecessary the blackification was. I'm coming up with this word here, blackification, but it's a bit weird.
You're getting there. See, and the other thing is, vote Black if you're Black, so you don't deal with the qualifications. You just vote. Skin is kin. But the problem is, she's lying about that. But the other problem is, and I don't have anything against it, you're supposed to vote for her because she's Black, but she's got a white husband. So the bottom line is if she can sleep with the white husband, then you can vote for a white man for president without any feelings of guilt.
Right.
So they're trying to rely on, you got to be this, that, and the other. And one of the things that gets me is this conditioning thing. 50 years worth of propaganda to prepare for where you're going right now with this rainbow cult they're trying to impose as sort of an official cult or faith for the country. you also have something else going on. The Democratic Party was founded in the second decade of the 19th century for the purpose of protecting and spreading slavery. It perfected the art of enslavement. And one of the things that I found most scary about this, I worked for a D.C. think tank more than a half century ago, and we studied this. And I remember having to read the slave pamphlets that were on microfilm in the Library of Congress. And one of the secrets to the enslavement process was put the elements of slavery into the Negro's culture so they would teach slavery to themselves without realizing it. So what's happening is this party of the slave masters that put this process in place has used it for something else. They don't grow cotton anymore, but there's a plantation, but they make rainbows on this plantation, and they evoke the elements of the slave culture that are in place to get the Negroes to vote for them without thinking about it. And the person they put in becomes most vulnerable to being isolated. Hillary Clinton, for example, came from a very interesting family, Rodmans. They were staunch Republicans. She was a cheerleader for Goldwater, one of the Goldwater girls. She was chairwoman of the Young Republican chapter at Wesley All-Girls University for 3 years as a Republican until she met Bill Clinton. So then she switches over. But I find that very interesting for somebody to be saying it's okay for Hillary to flip-flop on the parties. But Hillary was always a wannabe, and her parents were very much middle class, and she wanted to get outside of that. And she had a history of really downing her husband, Bill Clinton, because of his low origins. But Clinton was a smart man. And she was somebody that was isolated because she had no real connections to anything. So she became somebody that was subject to manipulation. You also have Kamala, which, by the way, is the name of a Hindu goddess, and it's not a black name. It's a Hindu name. And you've got her, she's isolated because who are her relatives? You know, one of her relatives by marriage, his name is Jesse Smollett, the one that got caught up with that fraud thing. He's her nephew by marriage. Okay? You get this little picture, a family connection and the noose around the neck. And by the way, I interviewed several Chicago detectives and police on that, and I happen to know one that's a cop. He's back in the DMV area now. And Jesse and the bunch had been planning this for months, and they used to discuss it at this particular athletic club, and everybody knew it. And they got pictures of Jesse Smollett buying this noose during Halloween season at a costume shop. They've got it on video, and on security cameras, you can see him putting the noose around his own neck. And he had met with Kamala just before that, and she and Cory Booker, this is the same day when he flew into Chicago. They had been working on something that Conyers came up with in 1997 that is now modified and introduced as the Emmett Till anti-lynch bill.
Wow.
Remember the neck?
Yes.
And the whole thing, they went off and then they had to withdraw it because of the fraud that came out.
Wow.
Well, see, this is something they're trying to do, and maybe this will give you an idea of how they're sneaking around here. The Emmett Till anti-lynch bill has nothing to do with black people.
No bill they put up has anything to do with black people.
No.
Or just the headline, but then when you read it.
The headline does.
Yeah.
But what it does is it puts into the American federal criminal laws for the first time sexual orientation as a victim category for criminal offenses. Now, when you think of a lynching, you think of a mob killing somebody, right? Well, the Emmett Till anti-lynch bill, one, doesn't require a mob. It can be one person. It doesn't even require a homicide. You can kidnap somebody or beat somebody. And how does that play out? What happens, let's say you have a guy who's broken up with his girlfriend or his wife, and he's feeling down, and some of his friends say, hey, man, let's go to the club. So he goes to the club with his homeboys, and he's dancing with this PYT, pretty young thing, in a tight, short dress, big boobs, hoop earrings, braids, down her back, and they're having a good time exchanging spit over in the shadows and drinking wine. And then he looks down. Man, you got a heart. What are you? You got a heart on. And he busts him in the mouth. Now that's federal lynching.
Wow.
So what they did with it, you see this bait and switch. Also, look at the Black Caucus. They love Kamala because she's just as big a fake as they are. If you examine the voting records for the Black Caucus, you will find something very interesting.
Is it really the Rainbow Coalition?
Yeah, because they're a member of the Liberty Caucus, which is the LGBTQIA plus caucus in Congress. I think all but 4 or 5 of them. And they do more work for the Liberty Caucus than they do for the Black Caucus. Now, we have in Memphis, for the 9th District of Tennessee, we have Steve Cohen. He's white, he's Jewish, he's gay, and guess what? He is chairman of the Black Caucus's Reparations Committee. So he's also holds that same position for the Liberty Caucus. So what is this? When you look at 5 years ago, they had that circus for 2 weeks about whether to have a formal committee set up to study reparations, and then 2 weeks later, on the first voice vote, no debate, they passed what's known as, quote, the Gay Reparations Act.
Okay, so this is what we're doing is we're using black people as a smokescreen to allow
and that's what they're doing with
LGBTQ to
Kamala
spike the
Harris.
book.
Is
Yeah.
you take a significant voting group that has emotive needs and cravings to belong, and here you give them an opportunity to identify with somebody who has absolutely no connections with them. Even if it was black, she's not somebody who has a prior generation in America. She is the immigrant herself because her parents were not immigrants. She is the immigrant. And by a technical call, she's qualified to run for president. See, the Constitution defines citizenship in 2 places. 1, how to be a citizen, and 2, qualifications for being president or vice president. So technically, you can be a citizen, but you can't be president, like, say, Cruz down in Texas. He ran, but nobody brought it up. He was born in Canada, so he was not born on American soil. But see, Kamala was born in the same hospital my ex-wife was born in when my now late mother-in-law was a paternity nurse in that same hospital. So she's born on American soil. So I don't think they had any intention of having somebody just come in right there and getting in that easy way, but she matches the bare bones qualifications. But you get somebody like that, they're easy to manipulate and control because they've got no connections with this place.
I think it's quite a tell that Kamala doesn't have any children of her own. It's something that I think is concerning. I know that the left freaked out and Taylor Swift posted a picture of her with a cat when J.D. Vance accurately said that you don't want a bunch of like childless cat ladies running things. And I agree with that. And I also agree that similarly in the exact same vein that it is concerning when you have basically a coalition of childless cat women and so many homosexual men, people like Cory Booker. I don't know if everybody knows he's homosexual, but and in these positions of power who are informing policy very removed from a certain kind of compassion. And I know people, they tried to make it seem like you meant, oh, women that are struggling with fertility issues. That's not what we're talking about. We're
No,
talking
you're
about
not.
people that have zero inclination, desire toward family, but they want power, right? And it genuinely scares me when I think about this, because they are naturally nihilistic. They're where they gain that power and that assertion from within themselves, to me, is quite troubling. And their ability to inflict pain. You know, I did a lot of translating, pardon, the pieces that the journalists that exposed Emmanuel Macron's upbringing and the fact that his wife was actually born a man. He spoke about this at length, about when you have someone who was raised up like this, someone who was sexually assaulted when he was young, introduced to sort of these perverted sexual things. We're talking about so much sexual perversion in the government. Their ability to inflict pain on others almost knows no bounds. There's an element of a sociopathic nature that's instilled in them at a very young age. And I think we have too many of these sociopaths that are in government. Their ability to lie. Like I say to people, pause, forget what you think about Kamala, whether you're voting for her, whether you're not voting for her. We've now established as a fact that she put a fake woman in her book and tried to present this Black woman as her grandmother. What kind of a person
would do that?
Yes. Like, what do you think about what that takes to find the photo, whether it's photoshopped, whether it's a photo of you with a different person, whatever, you put it in your book, you lie, you are sealing the identity of a Black person, knowing that actually you descend from slave owners, right? And you feel nothing. And you keep this up because you realize nobody's fact checked it. You're going around, you're trying to blackify yourself, and you feel nothing. What does that tell you about what that person is capable of? That they don't have basic morality.
Ruthless, unprincipled person. And you pointed this out earlier. What happens when you have no legacy?
Yeah.
You don't have any interest in continuity. You're not thinking like you do when you have children, grandchildren, or when you adopt somebody who is actually a child and you participate in raising them.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to do this as an analogy, but dogs are part of our families, right? People love their dogs, but you didn't have the dog, you adopted the dog. Well, if you adopt a child, that becomes your child. You raise that child. Now, she adopted 2 teenagers, which, that doesn't count. They're already grown.
Who adopted a teenager?
She adopted her husband's 2 children.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
No.
So what happens is, what is her stake in tomorrow? I mean, if you went out and you adopted a 9-month-old, a year-and-a-half, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and you're raising them, you've got an interest in tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, that's like that example I gave you of, you come down the jungle trail with an antelope across your shoulders and you see this war party about to fall on your village. Nobody's looking. Do you sneak off or do you sound the alarm and maybe die to sacrifice for your village and your people and your descendants, or do you just turn around and run?
Kamala turns around and runs.
Yeah.
She has no stake in tomorrow.
No stake in this. And her connections are suspect, but her connections make her vulnerable. It's like, I was in California when a lot of this was going on, and she and Willie Brown got detailed in the LA Times and the San Francisco Chronicle a lot about what they were doing. So you're in your 20s, and this is 30 years ago, and you're getting paid $72,000 a month for showing up at 2 meetings a month, maybe 15 hours for the month, and everybody else on this panel that you're on is 65 to 70 years old with a lifetime in medicine, and you have absolutely no medical background, and you're getting paid $72,000 a year because you're a mistress to somebody that's 60 years old and has put you in there, and then he gets you sort of promotion to another aspect of this same setup, and you get $120,000 a year for showing up for 2 meetings a month, and she misses 20% of them. And this is 30 years ago. $120,000 30 years ago is making $250,000 now.
Wow. And people need to know this is the true story of Kamala. People aren't making this up because it's election season. You can go back and read the article in the LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle. I've read them. They were basically like, this woman is sleeping around and she's making a ton of money. You know, she slept with Willie Brown and he's just putting her into yeah, that's right. Putting her into positions of power.
And then there's the other thing too. They talked about how she got on with the DA's office in Alameda County and also some other things, and even getting to be U.S. Senator, which I found very peculiar because, you know, now senators are elected by constitutional amendment. They used to be appointed by the states. She is the first person, the only person in California's history to run with no Republican opponent for U.S. Senator.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, see, it's interesting, the whole 9 yards. And then there's another suspect thing, One West Bank. George Soros was the major investor in One West Bank. Mnuchin, later the Obama administration, and for 1 year in the Trump administration before he got fired, he was CEO. This is when they were having that mortgage foreclosure fraud situation. All right? I had 3 neighbors lost their properties behind this fraud. So just about every county in California returned indictments against Mnuchin and One West Bank. There were 5,200 plus counts of indictments returned. 5,200. Well, Soros and Mnuchin raised a lot of money for Kamala, quite a few $1 million for her to run for the office of Attorney General of the state of California. When she got elected, she used her authority to consolidate all of these indictment counts and dismiss them. 3 weeks later, George Soros sells One West Bank for $3.42 billion. And then they raised a lot of money to get her elected as U.S. Senator without Republican opposition. Now, can you imagine California with no Republican candidate running against the Democratic Party candidate?
Incredible.
See, that's how she gets in. And at that point, she was Indian.
Oh, yeah. She was sworn in as Indian.
Yeah. So she wasn't talking about being black. I find something else, too. If you're part white and you're part black, what are you as far as Americans concerned? You're black.
Mm-hmm.
If you're part Asian and part black, America takes you as black. So how does she get to be Indian, recognized as such if she's got black in her? She doesn't.
No, she's without question Irish Indian. There's no question about it. She's Irish Indian.
You get this mythology in, but she's easy to control because, A, she's lazy. I know a lot of lawyers, now senior members of a firm that I recruited to law school way back when at UCLA back in early 70s. And they'll tell you, she was not one that put in a lot of work when she prepared for a case. She'd shorten her hemline up every day of the trial, and somebody's supposed to be impressed. And we have somebody that counted on other people doing the work, and she did the casting couch thing to get to the top. But at the top, what are you going to do?
Exactly. If you're not qualified.
You're going to deal with Putin? He's probably got something waiting in the far wing of the Kremlin that looks a lot better than this 60-year-old woman. Xi Jinping, you know, he's going to be inscrutable and, no.
Well, you even saw when Putin sat down with Tucker, he was very clear. He's like, I don't deal with your president's. He heavily implied it's just a show and I deal with the CIA. Like, your presidents are not running the country. I deal with the CIA. And this was why the media freaked out when Tucker was going out there, because this is kind of I think now a known thing that the people that purport to be in charge are just puppets, and there's people behind the scenes that are pulling the strings. And it seems like that is very much the military-industrial complex. We're talking about Halliburton, we're talking about the CIA. The war machine is telling them what to do, what to say. They just need someone that can at least read the teleprompter. And Joe Biden stopped being that.
Yeah,
He
can't
stopped
read
being
the
able to even
teleprompter.
just read the teleprompter. So they said, okay, we've got to go to our B option, which is Kamala.
And then look at this. There was no primary vetting.
I know. It's incredible.
There wasn't even anything the old time way where you had convention ballots going on. The last time she put herself to the test, she had to withdraw early in the primary season because she wasn't doing anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have this other thing where how do you jump from being the least popular vice president or president in the country's history if you take the last 70-some years of polling, and all of a sudden you become a front runner? It just doesn't happen. But then you look at what's going on with the press that, I'm astonished at the press now. It's like they're the propaganda engines for the Democratic Party.
They've always been that,
Well, no, they weren't. Not back when. You'd have a report that said, okay, Donald Trump claimed that so on and so forth. Meanwhile, his Democratic opponent made a counterclaim. You wouldn't have Donald Trump lied about this, or Donald Trump made a false assertion.
Yeah, you're right. I guess what I mean to say is that I think the media, I shouldn't say has always been Democratic. Whichever candidate was going to get them the war they wanted. And I think right now we are on the brink of they want World War III. I've been saying this for 2 years on my show. It's been very obvious the way that they're covering everything. We're going to get dragged into another war. And I don't think that I actually know, because he has said this, that Donald Trump is their war candidate. Trump has been very much, he started out much more isolationist, full stop. He was like, every boy needs to come back home, America first. Now he definitely has already said that he doesn't support what's happening in Ukraine, that we shouldn't be involved in Ukraine. That's not going to work for the war class. They're laundering money over there. I think they want to make this thing bigger. And Kamala is just an empty vessel. She'll do what they'll say. Trump is got his guts. He's got his wits about him. He's going to say, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do that. He's too strong of a person.
He's somebody actually in charge, not a figurehead.
Right.
Now, Bill Clinton.
And they can't have that.
Bill Clinton was a hillbilly, but he had leadership capacity and he was a strong man. I remember something that I saw him do that was very fascinating. 40-some years ago, they had a coalition down here in Arkansas, and they met up in Jonesboro at a synagogue. I think it was Jonesboro. And I went down there to consult with them, and they had an organization that had farm workers, League of Women Voters, Jewish Defense League, etc., and a bunch of ministers. And these night riders were coming by in flatbed trucks with shotguns and rifles, intimidating everybody. So they got the bright idea of, let's call the governor. He's a young guy. So they did. Bill Clinton showed up, buffed out dude then, big, and he had his Arkansas State Police guards, and he made them wait inside the synagogue or church, and he gave his coat to the preacher, and there was this guy with a bullhorn over there agitating. He went over and knocked the thing out of his hand. The big guy picked him up, rammed him up against the wall. His feet were about this high off the ground, fished in his pocket, took his wallet out, looked through it, put it back in, and said, your name's so-and-so, this is where you live. And if I see anybody, hear about anybody coming back here to mess with my constituents, I'm getting you. And he threw the guy down, and somebody came up with a shotgun. He punched him, butt stroked the guy with his own shotgun, and walked down the sidewalk, knocked 4 or 5 people to the ground, and said, anybody want a piece of this? I said, damn. Right. I'm impressed. But you see, they don't make them like that now for the Democratic Party. They don't have any Give 'em Hell Harrys. They don't, who was a captain in the artillery in World War I and decorated. They don't have any John F. Kennedys who had PT 109 chopped in two by a Japanese destroyer. They don't have any FDRs who was Secretary of the Navy from a family of warriors, least of all Teddy Roosevelt, who led the Rough Riders up with the 10th Cavalry up San Juan Hill. You don't have that. You don't even have Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was an interesting guy. You don't have people like that now. You've got some wishy-washy somebodies that would be nobodies if they didn't have the lifetime political connections where there is obvious corruption. You, for your entire adult life, have been on a government payroll, but you're a multimillionaire. It just doesn't equate. Not at all.
Right, right.
So, and by the way, you get people who are very vulnerable. And when you have somebody that's vulnerable, you can control them.
Emmanuel Macron, Barack Obama with his history, homosexual relationships. Yep, Biden.
Let me tell you about Biden.
Yeah.
Fox, 2.5 years ago, did a moot court thing where I was the judge on it in New Jersey. So we kind of got a jury selected, and they were going to play grand jury. Was there probable cause to believe that Hunter Biden committed an act in violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA? And we had the technician who worked on the laptops. And by the way, I said laptops, plural. There were 3, not 1 like the press is saying.
Wow.
And he downloaded all of them and had the documentation where he got permission from a perhaps high Hunter Biden. So we got to spend hours going through the laptops. There's a lot of incriminating stuff in there. Like, for example, I'm led to believe that one of the reasons that Trump wouldn't turn over the documents out of Mar-a-Lago is because they were deeply incriminating against Biden and Obama from what was being said on those laptops. This fool, this crackhead, even had White House tapes on that laptop. Wow. And they still have White House tapes, but they're not just auditory, they're visual. And some of the things in there, were there wartime things going on, would be treason. One of them concerned about backing the U.S. Navy off of aggressive counter-patrolling of the Chinese Navy in the South China Sea when they were trying to build these concrete emplacements on these slightly submerged atolls so they could claim 200 miles of Chinese territory around them, and they wanted the Navy to back off. That's all on there. And the admirals, 2 months later in military times, were complaining about them being told to stand down, and how disgusted they were with that. And there was money being talked about. You heard that thing about $10 million being mentioned.
For the big guy?
Yeah, but it wasn't just to the big guy. It was to Obama, Biden. And in the video from the White House tapes, there's this Chinese guy talking about he'd made $100 million deposit in the business that Hunter was involved with, and each of them got 10%. That's, I mean, it may have been AI, but what was in there, it may not have been either, and somebody needs to look at it. And by the way, to show you what they're doing with weak people and being able to get away with stuff with what they've done with the press, the President of the United States is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. He can override any general. He can give orders to the generals. He's chief diplomat, and he can override the Secretary of State, who works for him as a cabinet officer. All right? So what that means is just like he has unlimited pardoning power. Nobody can gainsay the president when it comes to pardoning. Nobody can gainsay the president when it comes to either classifying or declassifying in whole or part any document by any means he chooses. The case on that is United States Department of Navy versus Egan, EGAN, 1988. If you look into the whole thing, there are multiple concurring opinions, and they say he has absolute authority to classify or declassify.
Right.
There's an old case from 1803, a very famous one called Marbury versus Madison, that says the president is under no obligation to comply with an unconstitutional act of Congress. It set the principle for the Supreme Court being able to, or a court, appellate court, under appropriate circumstances, for being able to declare an act of Congress unconstitutional. And when they came up with this thing with the archivists have authority to dictate what they're going to take into the archives, that usurps the constitutional authority of the president, which cannot be done by legislation. So that act is unconstitutional. And considering what we were looking at from those laptops, the downloads, it looks like there was some very incriminating stuff that Trump did not want to surrender to the archivists because that would allow the culprits to get control of them and cover their tracks.
Today's economic environment is still really stressful for a lot of us, but with the Fed finally dropping interest rates, there is no better time than now to put you and your family in a better financial position. If you're a homeowner, American Financing is helping thousands of families just like you who have been putting everyday expenses on credit cards get out from underneath the debt by tapping into their home's equity. American Financing is saving their borrowers over $800 a month on average. $800 a month is like a $10,000 a year raise at work, and it costs absolutely nothing to find out how much you could be saving. They are closing some in as little as 10 days, and if you start today, you may not have to make next month's mortgage payment. There is no better time than now to turn your situation around, so call today. The number is 800-795-1210. Again, that's 800-795-1210, or visit americanfinancing.net/Owens. That's americanfinancing.net/Owens. Got it. Okay, because I was wondering, I was saying, for me, it's like, why isn't Trump just released to the public? You know, I remember how much collusion was happening even with big tech back when Jack Dorsey was running Twitter. He wasn't really running Twitter. It was more like the Democratic Party was running Twitter. But I remember going through text messages and the Ashley Biden diary stuff, but also some claims of incest between Hunter Biden and his niece. Hunter Biden was texting with Joe, his parents, saying like about her claims or whatever it was, and the media just left this alone.
Well, that's the salacious stuff.
Yeah.
If you get into what's on the laptops in terms of he thought he was going to be a porn star.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's interesting some of the people he's having sex with on the videos that are in there. It's pretty graphic, full frontal or back, whatever you want to put it.
Were there other political daughters that were in
yeah.
I think because I remember seeing someone that looked like someone, but I was like,
It was someone. You can see it in there. I mean, and they cleaned it up, but there are three of them. 1, 2, 3. And that black box behind the Corvette in the garage, there was some dialogue about, did your friends get a chance to look at the box? You know, this kind of thing, and big guy and all of this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
so it's we know nothing. I mean, it's just incredible. The public, they give us 10%, and then the 90% is just being completely hidden.
But you see, there are ways of getting it. But you cannot rely on the mainstream media, because nowadays there's been a thing that has changed. They're into the ratings game because too many of them are hooked up with visual media now instead of just the print media. It was one thing when a place like New York or Los Angeles or Nashville or Memphis had multiple daily newspapers and they were competing to see who sold the most and who got the most commercial revenue from people putting ads in there to win. How many newspapers you have from Nashville? 1. How many you have from Memphis? 1. How many you have for Los Angeles? One, there's no competition, so they've expanded into being part of a communications empire where, like in Memphis, the same family that controls the commercial appeal owns all of Channel 3, half of Channel 5, and a quarter of Channel 13, and a quarter of Channel 24, and it's all incestuously controlled, so they're not competing to be most accurate in penetrating and in depth when it comes to the news. They use the opportunity to editorialize. Instead of there was a holdup, the police reported on such and such street in downtown Nashville, blah, 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 blah. They'll say, once again, we have an example where there needs to be gun control. That's not the event. That's editorialization.
Right.
Put that on the op-ed page.
Oh, of course.
So you don't have that kind of accurate stuff, but that stuff is available because there are entities where you can get it. But there's a funny thing that's becoming apparent. Some of the best sources of information are no longer national. You can go on China's website, which is a huge thing, and you will find that they have more accurate reporting of what's going on in the United States than you will get from an American paper.
Absolutely.
You will find, too, that some of the most interesting domestic sources have a little caveat. Say this is involved with matters of national security. Therefore, please be advised that if you enter the website, the Department of Defense may find it necessary to...
No way.
Yeah.
Pay you a visit.
No, not just that visit, but this kind of visit. 24 years ago, I was guest of the DEA out there in Los Angeles. They had 4 centers they took me to. One of them I found very intriguing. It was a room about size of this, I guess it would be living room you guys have downstairs, bigger than that. And from floor to ceiling, there are all these monitors, and it's people's computers. I thought that they had seized these computers. Oh no, we got basically a peep warrant, and we looked in on one person who is of interest. So now we are going through the computers of everyone that this person was in communications with. And they're laughing about some of the salacious stuff that's on there. And then they said, I want you to come in and watch this. I said, what are we looking at? Said, we are putting a surveillance device on this guy's automobile. We have been using some that we have to replace regularly because they are battery powered, but we're going to hook this one up with the car's electric system so we won't have to worry about it. So I'm looking at this vehicle parked in a driveway in a residence, and I said, well, where are you guys? So this camera's about 1.5 miles down the street. Wow. So, wow. So you see this van pull up, 3 guys get out, they threw down one of these lay down on roller platforms, and they scooted under it. And the guy took one of these Slim Jims and popped the door lock. They opened up the hood. They made the installation. It didn't take them more than a minute or two. And so now we got this guy so we can know what he's doing, got sound and everything else. And this was 25 years ago.
Yeah, the technology they have is absolutely incredible.
Tell you another thing, right up here in Jackson, Tennessee, been almost 40 years ago, I had a drug trial there. Went on for 3 weeks. They gave a demonstration of the technology to the jury. I said, oh, we are in trouble. They have this grain silo in Jackson on the railroad tracks. So about 3-4 miles away, there is a playground. So they're giving a live demonstration, and this kid's on the playground with a basketball. So he's standing there, and they quickly do staged in zooms. You can read it's a Voight basketball. I said, oh, this is deep. Then they went in a little bit more and it said, inflate 13 PSI. I said, oh, wow, that's from 6 miles away. So they focused on the next door neighbor of my client. You couldn't see in because of the reflection of the light. They put a polarized filter on the thing so you could see in. The woman was drinking coffee, and you could read the headline on the newspaper. Then you could start reading the article on the newspaper, and this was 6 miles away. I said, oh, we are in bad trouble. So they did a final demonstration.
When was this?
This was in Jackson. This was like
Year-ish.
1986. So they did another thing. Myself and the prosecution, we wrote a note on a yellow pad. They said a satellite was passing overhead. It was reasonably clear day. The marshal went outside, held the pad up. We could see real time on the monitor. He got the pad held up so the satellite's 20-some thousand miles up in orbit, and we could read what we wrote on there. I said, oh.
Well, it's actually, when you say that, it's just, it's so
trouble.
funny that they try to present to the public that everything's always like an intelligence failure, like Trump near assassination attempt. I mean, you're telling me that you don't have the tech to protect Trump when he's at a rally. Like, we have the Secret Service and the government crawling the place, but you guys just don't have the tech to be able to see that someone's scaling a rooftop. I mean, because obviously the technology that they have, the government has, is like decades advanced from what they give to the people. And so when you see these situations, it's incredulous. You know, it's incredulous that they did not know. It's because they did not want to know. And it's one of these situations where I believe there's always a lackey. There's always these stories that you're told about this one crazy lone gunman. I never buy it. Didn't buy it with MLK. I don't buy it with JFK.
It's 2 men on the MLK. They were Marine snipers.
What do you think about JFK? Because that Chaos book tells us that the guy who shot the guy was MK Ultra.
Well, let me tell you this. I got an invitation after I had done this King thing from some retired Dallas detectives, including the person that discovered the rifle in the Eyrie at the book repository. The one who said, I walked in, was talking to the building superintendent. We had to go get the elevator because you couldn't summon it. You had to physically walk up. So you had to leave the basement area where the guy's office was, walk across to the other side of the building on the first floor, then take the stairs up. So as we were walking across the first floor, here comes Lee Harvey Oswald. So I stopped him, and the building soup said, hey, he works here. So at that point, I noticed the elevator travel down to my right. You could see it come down from the top floor, and it went down to the basement. We went on and walked over and got up to the top. I just passed Lee Harvey Oswald, and when I got up there, I found the Carcano rifle. I sealed the room, and I'm the one that discovered it. Now, there's some other interesting stuff on that. We went and looked, and it was interesting in that the very limo that Kennedy and the governor were riding in was being operated along the course so everybody could see it. Now, I don't think the shot came from the grassy knoll for a very good reason. If anybody was standing along the curbside, Kennedy's head would have been hitting them about right there. You would have had to have counted on being nobody between you and your target, which from the situation was not going to happen. But from the pictures they had 6 or 7 boxcars that were on the tracks. There were 7 railroad tracks on this bridge. There was only one cop, and he was looking at the parade. The car comes in, and as it's looking from the bridge, it's on the same level as the bridge. Then it drops down, and it swings over. But for the count of 7, it's going straight on, and the target is less than 100 yards away, which is point blank for a rifle. Here's the other thing. I had done a lot of ballistic experimentation. In fact, I've testified as a ballistics expert in front of juries, jurors. So I said, if you've got a hole that's a clean hole in the windshield, that means the bullet came from the front. If it came from the back, like they claim, the windshield is bulged out like somebody's head hit it. So find that and go do it. And they called me up later, said, you're right. If you shoot that kind of windshield from the rear, it bulges out. If you shoot it from the front, it's a clean hole. So they got these carbon fiber rods of various calibers, 25 caliber, 30 caliber, 25 caliber, fits right through there. And it lines up with the bridge. Now, at the time this happened, there was a passageway through the bridge with openings from that passageway out facing the way the limo's coming, because it had been an old bridge that they put in the 19th century with gas lines for gas lighting. And there are these 7 boxcars, including at least one that was lined up directly with that shot. Now, here's the thing about the Carcano. There was an identifiable print on it. We went over this at some great length, and they said we couldn't hook this identifiable print up until a few weeks ago, which is why we called you. So, well, what did you get? Said, we got through this Freedom of Information Act thing from the Assassinations Record and Review Bureau, where by act of Congress, reinforced by an executive order by George Herbert Walker Bush and then Clinton, all federal agencies were directed to send all records on that. So we got this, and they let me see it. Billy Saul Estes was in federal custody. He'd been sentenced for some racketeering. He had worked up a deal through his lawyers that if it checked out, they were going to recommend that he get immediate clemency. He gave some names, and they ran the names that they got from this discovery years after the fact, and bingo, that person's fingerprints were what was on the Carcano rifle. And there was also another location, and they were talking about how Oswald was acting when they took him into custody. So when we went into this, and then they went through and they tested to see where the bullet should have come from, they did something else. The medical examiner for the state of Texas, chief medical examiner who did the autopsy on Kennedy, also operated a chain of funeral homes. Okay, the person whose fingerprint comes back with a bingo winds up dead in a supposed one-car wreck in Desert, Texas, broad daylight. They get an order to exhume his body from the graveyard. There's no body in the grave. There's an empty coffin. Okay, they're dealing with a U.S. attorney at the time who became a federal judge. The guy's name is Stephen Trott. I met him when I was in UCLA. And he promised them that he'd get the clemency, but the FBI came back and said negative. But they didn't know about the rest of it because he gave some names, and one of the names that he gave was the person. Now, there is a Marie Brown that I talked to. She's no relation, and she was LBJ's mistress, and she said she was at that party the night before Kennedy got killed, and he said JFK didn't have any part of it. He said, but he knew something, because he said, damn, these guys have gone crazy. They're talking about taking out the president. What the hell? And she said he was very troubled. Now, she had a kid with him in 1965. I met the guy, looked just like LBJ. Same size, build, big ears, looks just like him. I also met another son he had in 1966 by a black White House secretary looked just like him. Marie Brown introduced us, and this has been 26 years ago. So it's interesting what was going on. Now, when Trott got the report back from the FBI said there was nothing to it. The detectives accepted it at the time, but they did not realize that they had this information with the print until 20, 30 years later, they went and ran the damn thing. So now, the medical examiner is an interesting person. There had been a series of assassinations, murders for contract, and somebody who got shot 12 times survived. The house was set on fire. He was severely burned, but in spite of getting shot, he survived. He fingers the medical examiner as his attempted killer. So
Wow.
they take the medical examiner into custody, right? He's getting transported to a courthouse in Dallas for a preliminary hearing. He supposedly tries to escape, and they shoot him multiple times, they say. So they went to go dig this guy up, and there's no body in the grave either. And it's his graveyard. So they're going, wait a minute, what is this? This is like witness protection. In other words, the medical examiner who does the autopsy on Kennedy is supposedly killed for being a hitman. The guy that seems to have been involved with being the hitman, he doesn't have a body in the grave. What's going on? So they're taking me all around to look at all of this. So that's an untold story. And the guy whose fingerprint comes up is interesting. He was captain of the football team, ran track, was valedictorian for his high school class. He was summa cum laude at Princeton. He becomes a war hero. In 1949, he shoots a guy to death in front of about 30 witnesses, shoots him in the head 5 times. He's sentenced to die by hanging. 6 weeks later, the governor commutes his sentence to voluntary manslaughter, and he's the suspect in about 15 to 20 killings, but they never could put anything on him. So, I mean, what the hell?
Yeah. Man, what the hell is the question? And I think it's one of those things where I think that was a turning point in America when JFK got shot. I think there's been a full communist takeover. I think the world has become a stage. I think every candidate, and LBJ was in on it, obviously. I think every candidate that they've put forth really just has to be okay with the CIA's war campaign, you know, and any person that stands outside of it. This is why they freaked out with Trump. That's how you knew he wasn't in the in club, because they just didn't expect him. And they thought that Hillary was supposed to be Hillary Clinton. She's in the in club. And now we have a circumstance where Kamala Harris is very much in the in club. And
yeah, and she's vulnerable.
And she's vulnerable. She's in the in club. She's a vessel. She'll do whatever it is that they want. She has no opinions of her own. She's not even intelligent, if you ask me, plainly. Like she's
not.
She's not even intelligent. And so she's the worst kind of person. She's got no compassion. She lies and feels absolutely nothing. And she's the worst plausible candidate that could get into office right now when we're at such a critical juncture in this country.
Now, I've been doing what I do for a half century, and I'll say this. Probably one of the most unscrupulous, low, poor character category of people you will ever find are career prosecutors. It's okay if you are a prosecutor and then you get out of it. You learn your trade. And not everyone, there are exceptions, but they tend to get so cynical that they don't give a damn anymore, and they'll cut all kinds of corners, and it's about winning the game rather than promoting justice and equity. And I say equity, not this DEI mess, but in terms of fundamental fairness in use of the process for a legitimate purpose. They're ruthless. Also, being involved in this in any extent is not safe. When I had this James Earl Ray case in my courtroom, 3 incidents. I had some detective friends that I used to represent way back when they were just ordinary cops, and they'd follow me around. And I remember one time they said, Judge, you have 2 cars following you. Said, we're behind them. When you get down here, it was Union Avenue and Cooper. Said, make a left turn against the no left turn sign and pull in that in that gas station that used to be on the corner. I did. And they pulled in right behind, so we got the two of them blocked. Okay. Next thing, Judge, you need to take this call. It's an emergency. What the devil? So I'm on the bench. We'll take a short 5-minute recess. Yeah, this is Detective so-and-so. I'm out here with so-and-so. Yeah, what's up? Said, some people are trying to break in your Lexus. I said, okay. So keep me posted. About 10 minutes later, I'll get the call again. Judge, they were trying to plant 2 kilos of coke in your car. Now, next thing, it's about 3:30 in the morning. I've got a murder trial going on, and I've been up doing these charges, which you have to read for 5 or 6 hours on a murder case. A lot of work. So I'm home, sitting in my kitchen. I drank a beer. I hadn't even taken my suit coat off. And something woke me up, and I saw 2 people out front from where I was sitting in the kitchen, and I could see into the den area on the other side. There were 3 people out back. They took an interesting device with a large suction cup after they pried the screens out, put it on the plate glass, and ran the arm around with a glass cutter and lifted the center out. So I'm fascinated watching this. I was armed, so let's just say they tried to enter, and things got very exciting for the next few. And the next morning, a friend of mine who was the director of police, Winfrey, and another detective that I had represented, they showed up about sunset. And we discovered that for a half hour before this, the dispatcher's tape had been cut off, so they weren't recording. And for 45 minutes afterwards, they weren't. Things got real exciting that night, but it's like I'm just a judge, and I'm looking into it objectively instead of trying to, James Earl Ray, we're going to really do him in. Now, there's a caveat to what happens to James Earl Ray. There was a woman who contacted me along with some other people. She'd come up with an algorithm that relies on the fact that when humans are talking like you and I, only 15% of what you say consists of the words, 35% consists of the tone, and the other 50% is the body language. If they had a clear video recording of somebody talking, they'd run it through the algorithms, and they were seeing what bin Laden was really saying and what he meant, or Putin, or whatever it may be. And they would break it down into an animation for the body language and also analyze the tone. So these officers were concerned with Gitmo, and they wanted to make sure they were adhering to their oaths to uphold the Constitution. And they wanted to use this device to evaluate some of the things that they had heard and also to calibrate it. So they got 6 hours of the last taped interview of James Earl Ray that some people in Nashville had done. And they thought they were going to get a real live liar. So in 6 hours worth of tape, they conveyed to me that they were astonished when he was all the way over in the green telling the truth except for 2 questions, which essentially were versions of, if you didn't do it, do you have any idea who did? And he said, I really don't know. And it was showing neutral or perhaps equivocation. So they said when they were astonished that he was telling the truth, they wanted to come to me because they knew what I was doing on this case. And if the case had gone past James Earl Ray not dying and his lawyer dying in the same week, Memphis, Tennessee lawyer, and Dr. Pepper, who was involved with a lot of these assassinations things, was the foreign lawyer who was involved in this case too. I would have issued a finding that Ray didn't shoot King. Ray wasn't even in town. In the Memphis Police Department's homicide squad, I found had been for years telling the prosecutors, this isn't the man. You got the wrong guy. He wasn't even in Memphis. And it was not one man shot him from the flop house or the bushes under the flop house window. It was two people from the fire station dormitory, the cafeteria, which was directly across the street. They recruited him from the Marine Sniper School in Quantico, Virginia, which is right across the tarmac from the FBI Training Academy. So they supplied an XM-21. They got 5 of them and 5,000 rounds of ammo, and they didn't even have a hostage rescue unit at those times, and the Defense Department wanted them back because they only made 63 barrels and 62 rifles, and they wanted them for the NOM for experimental purposes. So we get into that, and now if you go to the Civil Rights Museum down in Memphis and you look at the exhibit, it says, we once thought that the shot came from the flophouse window, but that's impossible because it wouldn't open up far enough for a rifle to be used, and it didn't come from the bushes. It seems to have come from elsewhere. So after I retired, I had resources, so I started putting them to use, and we got a lot of information that backed that up. And by the way, I'll say this, Jesse Jackson is not the culprit that was collaborating with trying to get King done in. It was somebody else. But when you get into the ins and outs, there's a lot more to the story than the press ever let out.
First and foremost, I would say I think you're lucky to be alive if you were presenting a narrative that was separate
You ever
from the
seen
feds.
John Wick?
Yeah.
Well, my old man taught me how to shoot when I was 6 years old. I had a lot of money to get a lot of practice ammunition. So
when people hear this, right, we're having this discussion and we're really talking about government corruption from the very beginning. I mean, we're talking about potentially a breeding program for world leaders. We are talking about Kamala's entire career really being the product of corruption, whether it's, George Soros wanting to cash out on that company, her affair with Willie Brown, what she's obviously doing now, which is she didn't even really run for president. She just kind of has been just became the candidate overnight. We're talking about the murder of MLK Jr., the murder and the assassination of JFK Jr., the feds being behind all of these things. How are people that are watching this supposed to feel anything but completely exasperated with the state of politics in America? Like there is almost, it feels like no hope because we have a complicit media that's working to cover all of these things, gaslighting the American people, trying to squeeze us more on our freedoms, making our kids stupid, right? I mean, like literally in the future, it's going to be idiocracy in this country because the kids don't even know basic history. People actually believe that everything the media tells them is real. These kids can't even tell you the differences between genders anymore. There's 28 of them.
126.
Where do you derive, is there 126 now officially? Yeah. Where do you derive, if you do, any sense of hope in this situation?
Well, it's the people. See, the problem is nobody has opposed any of this because the adversity is between being fair to black folk and being old-time racist. That was the paradigm. But that's not what the case is right now. But the public is being conditioned to we have to be fair to everybody. And it gets a bit ludicrous. Well, he can't help himself. That's what he's compelled. That's his orientation. Well, okay. But I tried a lot of cases as a defense lawyer, a whole bunch of capital cases, murder cases, and I got the youngest person on death row in the world off death row, got a stay execution 23 minutes before he was supposed to be executed. He was 15 years, 2 weeks old at the time, so I've handled a lot of murder cases. But there's something going wrong with the big picture when people say, well, he's compelled. I've met some homicidal maniacs, but just because they are compelled to do something doesn't mean we should tolerate it. You have pedophiles. They're compelled to do stuff, and you can test them. I exercised a provision of Tennessee law when I was on the bench that said the sentencing judge can require any person he sentences to be subjected to a mental health evaluation, which I put together a crew to do this. And you started getting these people who were compelled to do certain things, pedophilia and other stuff, but that doesn't mean you had to tolerate them. At some point, somebody's got to say, there's this thing called public peace, dignity, and order, and we have to be conversant with what that means. So you have to protect that, because we aren't just isolated 10 miles from the next somebody through a bunch of woods or some scrub desert. People, we're right up under each other, so you have to have this compact with each other about behaving. So when they come up with this bogus thing of the person's compelled, no. See, that's not what the case is. And by the way, we've got a new opportunity here. Black, white, brown, red, yellow, we are all humans. And when you're talking about humans, you're talking about traditional nuclear family. You're talking about manhood, womanhood, childhood. You're talking about courage and bravery and other things that are promoted as part of the human character portfolio. So we have somebody that is against those things. We have an entity that they're trying to cram down everybody's throat. Now, you can't walk in and put a crucifix up in a courtroom or a city hall or a state office building or the state capitol or in Congress. You can't put a crescent up for Islam. You can't put a six-pointed star up for Judaism. You can't put sixth-armed Shiva for Hinduism. You can't use an image of Buddha, but you can put a rainbow in there. And you see that splashed all over the place, where the cities or the municipalities or the federal government in D.C. pays for the sidewalk or the crosswalk to be painted as a rainbow. The White House is lit up with a rainbow. They can't put Christian stuff on an Easter egg, but they can put rainbow stuff on there. You go into school, and they've got rainbow flags and emblems, and you've got transvestites talking to children dressed up like they're female harlots, and you have all of this. It's like they're trying to put a new faith in place as the national faith and cult. Now, people say, but it's not a religion. Oh, yes, it is, but it has no God. Neither does Buddhism. But Buddhism is an ancient and honorable religion, but it has no God. You don't have to have one to be a Buddhist, but you can have any, so long as you deal with a system of fair and equitable dealings with other people. But this one is predicated on something nihilistic. It is the first major effort that I can find where it seeks to destroy all of those things that humanity for eons has declared to be something of character. You know, we were hunters, and we had to watch each other's backs so we didn't get slaughtered by one of these large animals we like to barbecue during the summer. Or when the ladies were out going and gathering, you could all talk, chat, and protect each other from something that might be looking at you. Oh, that would make a nice snack, lunch, or dinner. You see, so we have these things about altruism and sacrificing for each other because we are conscious and we can understand that we have continuity that we're part of, except for those who don't get that. Now, these things that we hold important, every culture honors bravery, every culture honors courage. Every culture imposes a sense of guilt on people when they deviate from the cultural standards, a sense of shame for not rising to the occasion of doing what you're supposed to. But how many times, oh, it's horrible. We have to get rid of guilt and shame. We shame somebody. In California, that's even against the law to shame somebody. So what time is it What kind of horrible situation do you have where you're telling humanity you need no guilt, no shame, do what you feel like doing? That breaks down the social compact. That destroys the concept of altruism, where there's some things more important than me that I will get recognized as a hero. What did the Spartan mothers tell their sons? Sons, come back with your shield all on it. Don't run. Do what you have to do. Be a man. Women, you had childbirth. And until very recently, childbirth was as dangerous as being in combat in terms of the mortality rate. So both sides of this equation basically had high risk in being humans and doing what you had to do for the next generation. We had a concept of equal worth, but everybody is not equal. Hell, if everybody was equal, somebody 5'6" could go out there and beat LeBron playing basketball and get LeBron's check from the NBA, but you can't do that. So it's equal value, but you have this myth because there are people who don't like themselves and they don't want to act like they have any obligation to anybody else. And we have this nihilistic philosophy. And I remember on campuses around the country, I was in the BSU, Black Student Union, and the Black Student Alliance, and I was community rep for UCLA's BSU, and I got around the country a lot with people. And there was this reaction against that. And people were trying to say, we don't want that anymore. We want, because that's just so barbaric and it causes war and all of this other stuff. And it's like, well, what do you think you are about here? If you weren't in a position of controlling what's going on, there's a lot of stuff that would eat you. Ever been to the Chicago Field Museum? They've got two stuffed lions that between them ate 120-some people back at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. So they've got the actual stuffed pelts in there. And you know, if it wasn't for us being what we do, things would be eating us. So they don't eat us. They exist because we protect them now, or else they're viruses or germs, and we're working on that. So when you get something that's the apex predator on the planet, it by definition kills pretty well. We are the best killers this planet has ever produced, and every other predator or carnivore will occasionally kill itself. Lions do it, tigers do it, panthers do it, bears do it, you know, you name it, and it happens. So we have acculturated and socialized ourselves so we don't do that, and we keep it in check until it's necessary, and then we can become brave and courageous when the response is called for, man or woman. But when you take that away and you don't treat this predator because you're scared of what the predator is, the predator doesn't go away. It just retreats into the back of the person's mind. And since the person is not familiar with that part of himself nowadays, it will jump out and do a lot of damage. Like when you look at all these freaks that are shooting up the hallways or the hoods, you find out that they lack masculinity. You don't have to be a big guy. Hell, the most decorated soldier in American history was Audie Murphy. He was a Western star afterwards. He got just about every decoration you can get. But he was only 5'6", and he was a slight guy. But he had tungsten carbide balls, so to speak. And we honor courage and bravery, but these people don't like that because they're scared.
These big wireless carriers want to limit you on your choices when it comes to a data plan, basically forcing you to buy a ridiculously expensive unlimited plan. In today's economy, now is the perfect time to stop overpaying for your data that you're definitely never going to use. If you want to choose how much data you actually want, you need to make the switch to my cell phone provider, Pure Talk. For just $25 a month, you will get unlimited talk, text, and 5 gigs of data plus a mobile hotspot. Stop overpaying for wireless and get America's best 5G coverage with Pure Talk. Switching is very easy. There's no contract, no activation fee. You can even keep your phone and your phone number. Right now, my viewers will save an additional 50% off your first month. Just go to puretalk.com/Owens. Again, that's puretalk.com/Owens. I think that's just been honestly one of the truest callings of this podcast is really saying to people, we need to bring back traditional masculinity, we need to bring back traditional femininity, we need to bring back courage, we need to have people stop being so fearful. The thing that they don't want to confront, really, our predator, so to speak, right now has become the government. You know, you have people who are scared of being called a name, scared of being called a conspiracy theorist, scared of being called a racist, a sexist, a misogynist, an anti-Semite, whatever it is. And so they then become people that aren't even willing to just say the truth, when that really is the greatest act of bravery you can do right now, is to pursue the truth and to say the truth. Right. And so I think that that's a perfect place, like when it comes to this entire investigation that we've done into Kamala Harris, is being willing to stand up to the media narrative. This is some black woman, because really what they're looking to do is just re-enslave black people, or continue to enslave black people.
That's exactly it.
Exactly. Continue to enslave black people by this idea that we need to be tribal to people that aren't even black. Right. And so I do want to encourage people that are watching this to really consider the themes that we're talking about today. Read that book I keep telling you to read, Chaos. Confront, have at least the courage to confront what it is that we are up against, to realize these are not conspiracies that we are talking about. MLK Jr. and JFK Jr., these are realities that are being hidden from you for a very dark reason. There is a dark agenda out there. And I'm telling you that this woman, the truths we hold, I'm telling you, there is nothing true in anything that I'm holding right now. This is a very scary person. This is a person that is if you are willing to lie about who you are, right? Something so basic like who you actually are. I can imagine that there is no level of deceit that you won't be willing to
Mad
reach.
at that. It's too much the espionage game. Nobody fights. It's all behind the scenes. So what is the essence of a spy? They lie.
A lie.
Because they can't tell the truth about who they are, what they are, and what they're doing. They have to lie. So when that becomes your mindset, the spy game, I mean, little lies, you help people's feelings out.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the big lie, like, this is my grandmama. Hell, she's dead 4 years before you were born. What'd you do? Bring her back as a reincarnation? What are you talking about? See, that kind of thing is what we do not need. But see, this compact, here's one of the reasons men defer to women in one sense, is because up until recently, you went through some stuff we didn't have to go through. As I said just a few minutes ago, childbirth was as dangerous as being in a war. But men, we could fight, back. You didn't have to be helpless. We could fend off death as well as fight to administer death. But women, there's nothing you could do about your circumstances where you were put at risk of dying through childbirth. You just had to go through it. So you're kind of helpless while this condition of delivery is going on. And we men instinctively respect that. We need you for the human race to continue. You need us for it to continue to protect you and provide for you. So there is this acculturation thing that says when the Titanic goes down, ma'am, you and your child have my seat on the lifeboat. I'll die because you are a resource. I'm expendable. Now, get up out of that seat. Can't you see I've got on my pretty dress? I want that seat. See, you're going way wrong in the human nature. Humans and nature will not match up if you deal with this, because there's a safety bubble that's been happening for the last 75 years, 77, 78 years since World War II ended, where it's relatively safe in the United States. You don't have to worry about natural disasters that much. You don't have to worry about a horde sweeping through and taking you out until just recently. But you had to train the boys from infancy up so they'd get up out of that lifeboat seat, give up their safety for a woman and her child. You see, that's a very hard thing to do, to say, I'll die. And we have to do that. And meanwhile, something else is going on, and I wanted to touch on this. I know we're probably running out, but I'm here as long as you want me. But anyway, it's this other thing. What is the purpose behind this open border? There's an interesting thing about American law. Certain things are in the Constitution and certain things are left up to the Constitution as applied by Congress through its laws to effectuate the Constitution. That's Article 6. Now, one of those has to do with how we set our situation up. And we are not doing what we need to do because we are giving up too bloody doggone much when it comes to what's happening with the southern border. Here's what can happen under American law as it exists. One, the president has absolute powers of pardon or commutation, beyond question. Since he's also the chief diplomat, same thing about the classification of documents, the president can say, all right, I'm declaring that effective 2021, that everyone that came in here is entitled to asylum as a political refugee. We can't distinguish where these people came in because we didn't keep records. So anyone that came in from 2021 is in an asylum situation.
Do you think that's what Kamala's going to do?
Wait a minute, hold on. Let me give you the rest of it. Under American law, if you are a refugee or you're granted asylum, you automatically become a citizen in 5 years from the point where your entry is effectuated. You don't have to go through the classes. You don't have to take the test. You become automatically a citizen and you can vote. All of these illegals are going to the battleground states. So when the midterms hit 2027, all of these people would have been citizens for a few months and can vote. So this would allow the Democratic Party to effectively become the only effective party, because now they stuffed these states with 50, 60 million people who have crossed the border.
Also, the electoral votes are based on the census, and they include them no matter what in the population.
Yeah,
so.
and that's why something else. I filled out 6 censuses forms as an adult. And this last one in 2020 was the first and only one. They didn't ask me my citizenship status, nor the status of my parents. And it's interesting because in Article 1 of the Constitution, that census determines the apportionment of representatives in the House of Representatives. So in one sense, they don't want it known whether you're citizens or not, because that still entitles California maybe to pick up an extra person in Congress, or New York not to lose one, or Illinois not to lose one or two. And then the other one is if you can pull this off, all Harris would have to do is say, hey, I'm declaring that this starts from 2021, when the first batch started coming across the border heavily, which means in 5 years is 2027. The midterms, they can vote, so now we control everything. So we get to impose our rainbow cult on the country, which is the new faith, which has no character. Anything goes, because we're selfish. We don't give a damn about tomorrow. We are ruthless, and this is what we want.
Yeah, well, I can say without question, I am very awake to the rainbow cult, getting myself into a lot of trouble speaking about that. And hopefully the conversation that we have will get other people to realize like what it is exactly that we're talking about. The sorts of people that you really don't want to have power, and who are being given a lot of power right under our nose.
Yes.
Yeah. And so look, we're a few days out from the election, you guys. We've covered a lot of topics today. very much probably going to get a lot of headlines and a lot of hate for it, but I am definitely in a seat where I have an investment in tomorrow. I have an investment in the future. I have young children, and I am willing to fall on the sword 1,000 times to make sure that we have the courage to actually speak truth. So, Judge Joe Brown, thank you so much for joining us. We are definitely going to get you back because there's a lot of topics that you and I covered off record that I want to see if we can get on record. You guys, thank you so much for joining us.